Sure. Well, thanks, Matt, for organizing this, and thanks to everybody who's watching. And I hope everybody is safe with the fires and the smoke. It's very smoky where I am here in Sonoma today. So today, my firm, on behalf of our client Madi, who's going to be speaking to you directly, has filed a lawsuit concerning the recent elections earlier this year for student body president at the CSU East Bay in Alameda County. And Madi, this is not the first time he's run for this race, but in this particular election, there were 3 candidates, and he won the majority, the plurality of the votes. So he got the most votes compared to the other candidates. And the rules that all of these candidates agreed to at the outset included certain rules concerning how they're supposed to campaign, where they're allowed to place their materials. And they also included that in the event of a tie between 2 candidates, there would be a runoff election. Instead of honoring that rule, the election officials for this election decided to have a runoff election between the top 2 candidates and who are not tied. Madi won a clear plurality of the votes. And in that runoff election, the 2 bottom candidates supported one another, and the second candidate ended up being certified as the winner of the election. Because this violates the written rules that the university makes everybody sign concerning this election, Madi pursued legal remedies through letter writing and pre-litigation activity, which was unsuccessful. And so today, left with no recourse, he is filing this lawsuit. And what he is seeking in this lawsuit is the thing he ran for, which is being declared the winner of the election. And we all know from going to college that it's kind of a one-time deal for most of us, and he isn't going to be able to be a student again where he's able to run for this. And so we're seeking what's called specific performance as part of the outcome of this election, and for him to be declared the winner. Now, you're going to hear directly from him. You don't want to hear from me about this. You're also going to hear from Todd Davis, who is with the Hayward chapter of the NAACP youth and college wing. He's also part of the adult wing as well, but he's discussed this situation and the way that Madi has been unfairly, and we believe illegally, treated at CSU East Bay with the leadership there of the NAACP, and they believe it's important enough for them to take a stand on this as well. So after we hear from Madi, Todd's going to put it in perspective for why this is so important and is a bigger issue than just Madi, and really goes to the integrity of the elections of our public university system, and particularly CSU East Bay. So with that, I'll turn it over to our client to tell you, in his own words, what happened, why this is important, and why he's decided to take this to really the important step of filing for his rights in state court. Madi?
Thank you very much, Harmeet. Hello, everyone. My name is Madi Fakfagash. I was the candidate and winner of the Cal State East Bay student body election for president, the position I was running for. Ran for it twice. Last year had the same issue, but decided just to take a step back. I'll do it again my senior year, which I did again win, did again build a better team that helped me win. And from there, it was just a wild ride. I never expected it, never thought plain, simple language writing would become so difficult, so trying to use other things or other perspectives, when really I'm just saying, look, this is what it says. What you're trying to say, this 50% plus 1 does not make sense, especially when you have more than one candidate. This rule is not a rule. That's why it's not in the rules. It doesn't make sense. And this isn't the first time I've been in the election. I've been in it 3 times. CFO was a successful run. President, second time. First time was not a successful run. But then the third time was successful, but then other things had to happen to take away my victory. So immediately after elections, I just took a second, took a few days, read through all the rules, just didn't make sense. My first step was, let's try to solve this. emailed everyone on the election committee, started BCCing the administration. So they all got wind of this. And this was back in March. From there, just no success. They would just say, hey, do this, hey, do that, this, we have passed no judgment. Then I had to get other help because this wasn't working. So I reached out to the NAACP. I started reaching out to lawyers. Mark and Harmeet were the ones that responded, looked through the whole case, and saw validity. And as well as the NAACP, as well, they tried to solve this without going to court, without needing to go to litigation, because they did not see it as a huge matter that needed to blow up as what happened. And the university decided to respond as simple as kicking it under the rug, as let's just ignore this and keep moving on. And it led up to this, and this is where we are now. And I, like Harmeet said at the beginning, I'm not looking for a get rich case, try to make $1 million off Cal State East Bay. I want to take presidency that I won. I want to make a difference at CSU East Bay, and I want to take that and further my education, and then eventually better my community and California as a whole.
Well, thank you, Madi. And I think Todd's going to add some words about why this is important to the greater community of the East Bay.
Definitely. Thank you, Harmeet. So Maddie reached out to the NACP Youth in College. And part of the reason why I did that is because the Youth in College unit attempts to improve, whether it's educationally, academically, or on a civil rights level, those members of society who are between, let's say, 18 to 25. When he reached out about this issue, it struck us because our organization as a whole, the oldest civil rights organization in the nation as a whole, has always encouraged our youth to get involved, whether it's through protests, peaceful protests, of course, whether it's through demonstrations, whether it's through letter campaigns, but ultimately to take an active leadership role. Well, how much more active can you become than to say that I see changes that I want to see on my campus, and the way to do that is become part of their student government. So when we heard that not only did he try to become involved, but was denied access, that struck at the very heart of what our organization is about. We, of course, always attempting to work through the system, as Maddie pointed out, didn't even think about the courts in this matter. We simply wrote a letter to CSUEB, the administration. And in all honesty, we did not receive a response for an extended period of time. After that, we received our response. We were told, add specifics. We did that. At that point, it was as if we hadn't even written a letter. And when we realized that the normal channels of communication, which we've always, as Hayward in the AACB has always adopted with not just CSUB, but with other groups and other universities, which is, let's sit down, let's talk about this, let's discuss. We may not always agree, but let's come to some middle ground here. When we realized that that was completely shut off from us, we then agreed with Maddie that this had to go to the courts, have an impartial body to determine, okay, what's right and what's wrong, and then to have the enforcement ability to now implement what they felt was the correct measure, which we believe is, in this case, to sit Maddie as the president. And I would like to add, it was a little disheartening for us to hear about this at CSUEB, because in the midst of all of the politics of our nation, and we certainly are not going to touch on that here, the idea that someone can actually win an election and still be denied that position within a university, I think bothers us probably the most. Not just right and wrong, which this is, but to tell our young people, you can become leaders, and then to prevent them from accomplishing that goal and taking up that mantle, we knew we had to be involved. And so we appreciate that Maddie reached out, and we're given this opportunity to even reach out to university. And now we want to push further with him until the right course and goal is reached.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Todd. And I think I'm going to turn it back to Matt, who's, I think we're open for questions probably for the other panelists, but we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I just put a message in the chat. If you have a question, you can just raise your hand in the Zoom chat or type it up and I will read it for you. I'll promote you over to a panelist so you can ask it. Usually it takes a minute or so for, okay, so Rob Fisher, I'm sorry, I don't know which outlet you're from, asked, I'm a little confused why he was denied the office. Could you explain?
Sure. I think that's a good question for, well, let me lay the table as to what the legal allegations are. So this dispute is based in contract. The university has rules that it sets for its elections, and that's really administered by the Associated Students, Inc. They sort of administer it. That's the student body, if you will. But the university certifies the winners of the election. And those rules specify that a runoff election shall be had in one circumstance. And that circumstance is where there is a tie. There was no tie, okay? And so because there is no primary system and there is no tie, you have a multiple candidate election. And under those written rules, the presumption is the winner gets the position. And so after the fact, they've claimed, after being challenged by us and by the NAACP and by Mahdi directly, well, we've always done it this way. So no matter what the contract says, we've always done it this way. This is how we're going to do it. Well, those of us who live in the Bay Area and specifically are familiar with this concept of runoff elections, there's typically elaborate rules that go along with either ranked choice voting or runoff elections. But in our Bay Area, in races where there are multiple elections, we all know that, typically the person who gets the most votes wins. That's the logical default of an election. And since the rules don't specify otherwise, the student body seems to have gone out of its way and engaged in favoritism to award this position to the person who did not win the election. That is unfair. Mahdi was deprived of his rightful position of having won this election. And then when he pursued it and appealed it, the appeal was heard by people appointed by his, the person who wrongfully won the election. So this is what we call a stacked deck. This is completely unfair. It is a breach of contract. And we are seeking specific performance of that contract, which is declare the real winner of the election to be Mahdi and ignore the fake second election that they did to avoid the real winner getting the election. Mahdi, have I missed anything in reciting those facts?
Nothing more. I'd just like to emphasize that the appeal process, like Harmeet said, was rigged. It's pretty much just a kangaroo court, as the appeal is sent to my opponent, who was sitting on the board of directors, and as well as in the elections, you can run with a slate. And this year, they adjusted the slate from 7 to 14, and it was basically her and 5 of her board members. They all lost or didn't run against anyone. So she was the last one. And they obviously, when I sent the appeal, they just voted that, oh, the election committee did right. So they just gave her the position. And that's pretty much how it went.
So, I mean, if I can add, when you're talking about young people in their elections, if this rigged, fake type of an outcome is what is the law at CSU East Bay, what does that mean? That means people like Mahdi and other promising young people who we'd like to see get engaged in politics, in leadership, more importantly, in changing the world for the better, they're going to be discouraged from doing that. And who are you going to be left with? People who don't follow the rules, people who appoint their cronies, and people who engage in this type of results-oriented outcome decision-making, which is frankly illegitimate. So really that's what we're challenging here, is really the system that has led to this rigged outcome, and it shouldn't happen. And Mahdi ran, Mahdi won, Mahdi deserves that position.
We have another question from Steve Tavares. From the East Bay Express. I'm gonna see if he can ask it, or if not, I'll just read it. Steve, I just enabled you to ask if you want to unmute and ask, or put in the chat if you want me to ask it for you.
Hi, I think, I believe that somebody said that this happened the previous election too, and if so, can you explain, like, I guess during his junior year?
Mahdi, I will let you explain that. What happened with your disqualification in last year's election?
Yeah, so last year, junior year, when I ran for president as well, um, that year again, the student leaders, the board of directors always would rerun. So that year, there was 5 people running for president and no such thing as this runoff. And I won again, but there was a rule stating that you can't campaign in housing, which meant we thought was candidates can't campaign in housing. But since majority of us were in fraternity or sororities or had friends that lived in housing, they were telling people to vote for us in housing. That whole issue went out and they said, you, since they're your friends, they're considered your campaign workers, which was a whole big mess. Still tried to challenge it within the university, didn't go in, they didn't even respond to us. So we just left it because we're just young and naive. We didn't really read through it that much. And they just kicked me and my team out and said, you can't run because you're not the winners anymore, because you guys, your friends were your campaign workers, so they violated the rules. And we just had to sit back from there. And I was on the board of directors. I read this kangaroo court because it said that the final and only appeal should go to the election, to the board of directors. So I tried to use that in my ability, but no, I was again denied. James Carroll said, no, the board of directors is biased. You guys are all running. We have to give this to a non-biased person at CSU East Bay. And he did not do this year. He decided again not to follow this rule or the runoff rule, and the appeal should only go to the board of directors. So it's just been a headache with James Carroll, the elections committee, and CSU East Bay has just done nothing. That's the main thing. They don't do anything. You send 2-3 page letter, request and response, and they send a sentence or a paragraph.
Yeah, I mean, I would add that, last year we saw similarly the, different set of facts with similar arbitrariness, lack are making up rules that don't appear in the rules, farcically claiming that volunteers for a campaign are somehow, official workers who are bound by a contract they didn't sign. These are the reason why Mahdi, I think, and I'm speaking for him here, decided to take action legally this time is that it's the second time that it happened. And, who knows, next year they'll make up some other fanciful rules that aren't in the rule book to award the position to a favored, crony. And that's not how elections should run in America, whether they're in a university or whether they're in any other setting. And we don't allow it in other settings. I don't think we should allow it here. This is governed by a contract, and the contract doesn't provide for the way that it was handled.
Okay, the next question is from Angela from the Bay Area News Group. She asked, perhaps someone can explain why was he disqualified? Not clear on that. And also, did he get the most votes?
Mahdi, to you.
Was that for last year or this year?
I believe
it's
it's
qualified last year, so it will be last year.
Yeah, last year I was disqualified for my friends being considered and saying by James Carroll, and mainly James Carroll, he was saying your friends, anyone you know that supports you is considered your campaign worker. And in the rules, it states candidates and campaign workers cannot go into student housing, which doesn't make sense. That's part of the campus. We didn't know that, but that was used to remove me. And last year, I not only won, this year I won by 5%, last year I won by 9%, which took out of, just a huge margin win for me and my whole team.
okay. Does anybody else have any other questions? Either raise your hand in the chat or ask it in chat, or just mention you have a question. Let's give everybody a minute. No one else is raising their hand or saying they have any questions, so I think that's it.
May I say one more thing?
Please do.
Thank you. So I want to actually commend Maddie on pushing this issue this far, because in the midst of a pandemic, Maddie could have easily said, you know what? I'm probably not going to be able, even if I win, to exercise as president within this type of environment. And I just want to commend him that he didn't allow the environment to define him for doing what was right. That's, I would say, at the heart of the reason why the NAACP became involved. Because although we know that times are challenging right now, and they have been 60s and 70s throughout the whole civil rights struggle, we did not want to be defined by our times, but we wanted to define the times by what was right. And in this case, if we say that there are certain rules that people have to abide by, and Maddie followed those rules and won, not only his position, but in my opinion, won the respect of many, then how could we as an organization sit by and allow him not to fight? I also want to thank Harmeet and the rest of the Dillon Law Group, because they could have easily said, this is a campus election and it does not matter. But they saw the larger issue, which for us is basic justice, right and wrong. If you get the majority of votes, you win. When someone tries to change the rules, then you have to fight against that. I mean, at the heart of what NAACP has been fighting for over 100 years, is that you cannot change the rules simply because you don't like someone, simply because they're different, simply because you don't agree with them. If at any point that you do, then that's why we have the courts as a referee. And so I just appreciate the fact that we were able to be a part of this. I certainly don't want to take up too much more of the time, because I think Maddie is a true star. But I did want to add that in these days and times, we don't have enough people who are willing to stand up and say, despite a pandemic, or despite the fact that I could lose my job, or despite the fact that it could make me uncomfortable, then I'm going to stand up for those people who can't stand up for themselves. And I appreciate Maddie standing up for all the other candidates who have been mistreated or cheated. He said, you know what? I'm going to speak for you. And so I just appreciate that he's allowed us to add that voice to his message. Thank you.
Really quick, we have another question from Stephen Tavares, and thank you for your comment, Todd. That was great. From the East Bay Express, he asked, can we get a short timeline of events? When was the election, the runoff, the letters sent?
Maddie?
Yeah, so runoffs were in March, letters sent in April, response received from the university at the end of April, beginning of May. That's the same time the kangaroo court was taking place, the appeal process. And then from there on, they delayed about a week to certify results because they were getting legal notices and letters from Harmeet and as well as the NAACP. And they actually took some time. So we don't know what they did. We don't know what they decided, but they just decided not to take sides or not to get involved. This is literally what they said. And they said it's a student issue. So if the election committee, which is rigged, and the appeal process, which is a kangaroo court, decided that, they said pretty much they're just going to allow it to happen without saying it because they didn't do anything to stop it. And then since June, I had to prepare for it, grab all the documents, all the emails, everything as well financially, and start the battle with Harmeet Dillon alongside with the NAACP.
Yeah, and if I can add, you know, the courts have been closed for much of this time. Even today, you can't really, absent an emergency, get into court and have a hearing in person. And so, you know, we've been dealing as lawyers with that series of changing rules. I think what's very interesting here is how, although they robbed Mahdi 2 years in a row, they use totally different procedures. It's completely arbitrary. It's frankly shocking to the conscience that a university that purports to teach our young people how to comport themselves in the future engages in this type of disgraceful inconsistency. It really was shocking. And as Todd pointed out, you know, it is a student body election. As many of you may have known, I get involved in national elections and elections for candidates at every level. But, you know, this is where people learn how to run elections and whether they can win. And a loss at this stage or a, you know, total disgrace of a process discourages not just Ahmadi, but so many others who may choose to seek leadership in the future from running, leaving us with people who are okay with a rigged system. And we don't want that in our country, regardless of your politics. It's a system that doesn't work for all Americans and for all students at CSU East Bay. And so this is really why we chose to get involved here. There's a bigger issue, and why the NAACP is here as well. And I think when you see this case unfold and the papers we file and, you know, further motions that may occur, you will get more details about how indefensible this really is. And frankly, the university didn't even try to defend it. I think that speaks for itself.
Great. We don't have any other questions, so I don't know if anybody else wants to have any final comments or.
I think Madi can have the last word here. That would be good.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Appreciate it. But yeah, I just like to leave off and state that this isn't like we just are trying to get rich. I'm just really trying to get the position I want. And it's not like we didn't try to use all of the remedies inside the university, not trying to settle within the university. I've even reached out to my state senator, who as well even emailed and called President Leroy Morishita, and he said there's a process taking place. Let the process finish, and then I'll get involved. And then state senator as well as called me back and told me that and sent me an email. So the university ultimately allows and wants this, or they just don't care, is the only two conclusions I can come up with. And from there, I just had to continue the battle. Students have been supporting, a lot of students actually, which was amazing. And my fellow slate members who are on there, and I'm just the only one not there, they're just like, hey, they were saying, Maddie, is it worth it? Maddie, is it worth it? And I just like, I'm not giving up. They're like, Maddie, it's Corona. What can you do? I'm like, I'm keep on going. And I just wouldn't stop, because first year, yeah, I had one more year. I could have went further, but I just stepped back, focused on my grades a little more, and came back better and built a better team. And again, the same stuff happened, yet now even more fallacy and more made up rules. So I couldn't let it pass this year.
Thank you, Matt. Anything else?
I think that's it. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.